Halloween.
It's spooky. It's scary.
It's the one day of the year you can dress like a sexy bumblebee and nobody will question it.
But how did we get here? And where did all these frankly insane traditions start? Today, we investigate. The word Halloween has a Christian etymology. Hallow means saint, which was the focus of the Christian holiday All Saints' Day. Even was the word used to mean Eve at the time, and the reduced form was Een. So the day before All Saints' Day was called All Hallows Even, and then ultimately Halloween for short. The origins of the customs of Halloween, however, have been made murky thanks to questionable scholarly writings and popularization of said scholarly writings. In other words, a lot of what you've heard is fake news. A hugely popular theory is that Halloween has roots in the Celtic festival of Samhain, a festival whose spelling and pronunciation is perfectly designed to break the brains of anyone who does not speak Gaelic. Samhain was a huge feast marking the end of summer. As the seasons shifted and people faced the oncoming winter, it was a time for stock-taking and preparation for the hardest, most brutal time of the year. It was also thought to be a time when the barrier between the real world and the other world was at its thinnest. As historian Nicholas Rogers notes in his book, Halloween, From Pagan Ritual to Party Night, Samhain can be seen as a threshold, or what anthropologists would call a liminal festival. It was a moment of ritual transition and altered states. It represented a time out of time, a brief interval when the normal order of the universe is suspended and charged with a peculiar preternatural energy. There are some substances on planet Earth that will make you feel like this any time of year, but let's continue. Some early scholars, groping for easy explanations of the origins of Halloween, pointed to Samhain as the source for all of Halloween's death-focused imagery, devils, and spooky stuff. In particular, a guy called Sir James Fraser wrote this in 1890 about Samhain, a festival which was held in around the year 400. The night which marks the transition from autumn to winter seems to have been of old the time of year when the souls of the departed were supposed to revisit their homes in order to warm themselves by the fire and to comfort themselves with the good cheer provided from them in the kitchen or the parlor by their affectionate kinfolk. Yes, because as we all know, ancient Celts were well known for having kitchens and parlors. As our Halloween historian and author Nicholas Rogers points out, this anachronistic description of a Celtic festival should make us wary, for it seems probable that Fraser confused the rites associated with All Souls' Day with those that preceded it. Boom! Called out, Sir Fraser. That's straight cap, as the youth say. They do say that, right? Sir Fraser didn't come up with this ultimately probably wrong idea on his own. Prior to Fraser, there was a guy called Sir John Rhys, a Celtic scholar, the first Celtic scholar of Oxford, actually. In his 1886 Hibbert Lectures, he argued that Samhain was actually the Celtic New Year because he had visited the Isle of Man and saw that some of the customs practiced on October 31st were the same customs as some of those practiced on December 31st. With absolutely zero other evidence, he was like, see, October 31st was the pagan New Year, and because he was the first scholar, his idea went pretty much unchallenged. After this, Sir Fraser wrote a popular book that covered these topics, and he even went so far as to build upon Sir Rhys's ideas, suggesting that Samhain had actually been a Celtic festival of the dead. These ideas caught on and have been widespread in cultural stories in the media ever since. But finally, a challenger to these dubious theories appeared. Ronald Hutton, an esteemed scholar of British folklore and pre-Christian religion and author of the book Stations of the Sun, A History of the Ritual Year in Britain, initiated a swift and brutal takedown of the theories popularized by Rhys and Fraser. He blasted Rhys's evidence for Samhain being the Celtic New Year, calling it flimsy, and claims that Rhys was uncomfortably aware that the customs he claimed came from Samhain and were used at the New Year were actually precisely the reverse. Popular customs from the New Year got added to October 31st celebrations for increased participation and fundraising. His academic mic-dropping continues on to Fraser, though he does note that even Fraser thought Rhys's evidence was kinda sus. Hutton puts the nail in the coffin on Fraser's theories about Samhain being a pagan festival of the dead when he points out there is literally no written evidence of Samhain rituals because the ancient Celts were illiterate. Makes it tough for historians. What we do know about rituals around October 31st comes from stuff that got passed down in folk tales and was written down by monks, and those rituals varied widely across the British Isles. Everything from purification rituals by laying under the smoke of fire, to divination rituals using rocks to predict who would die during the winter, to pouring ale in the ocean as a way to pray for a good catch. People had all kinds of ideas about what activities to do, but Samhain was first and foremost a feast.
While it is recognized as a time of year where the barriers between this world and the underworld are thinnest and spirits may take advantage of this, the festival was decidedly not a festival of the dead. That came from somewhere else. I'm here at the very real, definitely not green-screened Vatican, the headquarters of the entity primarily responsible for all the spookiest bits of Halloween, Christianity. It's around the year 900, and Pope Gregory III has just declared November 1st All Saints' Day, a day of feasting and a day to pray for and show remembrance of all the saints martyred by the pagans. In other words, a day to celebrate Christianity's most baller dudes in the afterlife. So why November 1st? This is where it's easy to make the leap that the Christians just slapped their own name on a celebration that had existed in Scotland and Ireland for hundreds of years. But the facts show a different story. In Mediterranean churches, they were feasts on May 13th. Syrian churches went for Easter week for theirs. The Romans stuck to the May date, and Pope Boniface IV officially got on board with that in the year 609. But by the year 800, churches in England and Germany had some celebrations going on November 1st. Around the year 900, Pope Gregory III likely went, "Cool, that seems fine, those guys are our friends, we'll hold our festival on that day too," and got on board.
Why were the English and German churches celebrating on the 1st then?
As our boss historian Hutton notes, the origins of the idea are lost.
Alas, illiteracy and poor record-keeping strike again. Stay in school, kids. Hutton speculates it may be simply that some northern churchmen felt the need of a spectacular feast at the opening of winter, at a time when some form of merriment was badly needed. And yeah, we're down with that. But again, this is speculation. The truth?
We do not know for sure. We can guess, yeah, but no truly substantial evidence can confirm that the November 1st date was chosen because of pre-existing rituals in the British Isles at that time of year.
So do with that frustrating bit of non-history what you will.
Let's get into the origin stories of Halloween parties, costumes, and trick-or-treating, a frankly bizarre practice of kids going door-to-door demanding candy from strangers, something they are explicitly told not to accept at any other time of year. The interaction begins with a direct threat. Back here at the Vatican in the Middle Ages, people observed All Saints' Day by feasting and ringing church bells. This was at a time where the concept of purgatory, a sort of infinite religious waiting room between heaven and hell, was new and hot among Christians, and the running belief was that prayers from the living could assist a soul stuck in purgatory and get them upgraded to a spot in heaven. Sweet. On the night of October 31st, the evening of All Saints' Day, churches prepped extra candles and torches to use for illumination and to be used in processions. Hutton's book notes that the king dressed in purple and his attendants dressed in black, the colors of mourning.
In the early 1500s, there are records of some churches that went all out and arranged for mega entertainment on the night, like maidens playing harps by lamplight. Hell yeah. And churches provided tons of food and drink to their visitors. The second the religious service for the evening ended, the main event began, and the church bells started ringing for the souls in purgatory. This shit didn't stop until midnight.
In some places, this ritual happened again on the following day, because November 2nd was designated as All Souls' Day. Basically, the same idea, praying for the souls of the dead stuck in purgatory, but All Souls' Day was for all us basic who didn't reach sainthood in our earthly lives. It gave normies a chance to get some extra prayers sent our way.
But as tends to happen to all good parties, someone was mad about it and shut the whole thing down. And that someone was the Protestants. The Protestants condemned the idea of purgatory, were totally not down with the idea that if you prayed really hard you could help souls get to heaven, and were not cool on the idea that saints could act as a sort of conduit between humans and God. So, as you can imagine, they were not huge fans of the rituals happening on All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, and once they gained power, they got to work putting a stop to all this. In the mid-1500s, as the Protestants gained more control, regulations started appearing that restricted the rituals in All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. After one very brief resurgence around 1549, the Protestants laid the final smackdown on the bell-ringing fun and instituted a ban on these rituals in 1559. But the Catholics, for whom ringing bells had been the jam of the season for the last 500 years or so, were scared that not doing the rituals might mean dooming their loved ones to eternity in purgatory. A major bummer.
What to do? Change the ritual.
While some Catholics initially tried their bell ringing in more private ceremonies, the perpetrators of these now illegal acts ended up with citations, not optimal.
So they took their candles and fire to the countryside and shifted their rituals to be more fire-centric. According to texts from the time, in certain parts of England you could look around the hills at night and see fires burning everywhere.
So that's how the dead made it into the holiday. The costumes and candy begging developed differently. As this time, called Hallowtide in some places, was a feast, poor people took to visiting the houses of the wealthy to ask for something called soul cakes in exchange for prayers for the family's dead. A pretty good deal for all sides. This process was called souling, and the people going door to door were called soulers. Over years and years, the offerings provided to soulers expanded to other food items and even money. Kids made great soulers and were very much a part of this practice. That is, until some education reforms hit in like 1870, stating that all kids had to be in school during the day. Our boy Hutton has recorded a couple of the rhymes these soulers would use when they showed up at people's houses. Soul, soul for an apple or two. If you've got no apples, pears will do. If you've got no pears, half pennies will do. If you've got no half pennies, God bless you. K. As the years passed, young men in particular started doing more and more elaborate performances in exchange for food, drink, and money. Costumes emerged out of customs called mumming and guising, commonly done at winter festivals when there were also said to be spirits hanging around. This custom also picked up during Halloween and, depending on the region, varied somewhat on a spectrum from prankish behavior, which came from imitating evil spirits, to disguising yourself from roaming spirits. Prankish behavior dates back as far as 1736. In some places, people would go door to door collecting food and supplies to prepare for their feasts. In other places, cross-dressing was the thing. For some, it was about dressing as a particular beast. Some people would perform for rewards. On the Scottish mainland, where painted faces and weird costumes were important, they even had a terrifying chant that ended, "We are the geysers at the door. If you don't let us in, we'll bash your windows in and you'll never see the geysers anymore." Good lord! For illumination as they walked around, the pranksters or geysers carried hollowed-out turnips with a candle inside. They'd carve creepy faces into the turnips, and the carved faces outlined by the candle within were used to scare unpopular people. That's not a joke for this video. That's literally a line from Hutton's scholarly book. These turnip lanterns were called punkies, and competitions developed around who could make the coolest one. Eventually, we expanded our repertoire to include other vegetable lanterns. It was in eastern England that jack-o'-lantern got picked up. This was another name for marsh flames, which Hutton states had been recorded since the 16th century. These traditions arrived in North America in the early 1900s, when huge populations of immigrants from Ireland and Scotland headed over to Canada and spread to the US. Their Halloween traditions came along too. The first recorded use of trick-or-treating was in an Alberta, Canada newspaper in 1927, in reference to the practice of going door to door looking for candy. Since then, the Americanized version of Halloween has exploded in popularity and impact, while some poignant scholarly ideas note that it is a healthy way of exploring the mysterious and uncomfortable themes of death and the afterlife, and even poking fun at it through costumes. There are, ironically, religious and political extremists who believe the event is satanic or unholy due to the imagery associated with the modern celebration. Which is weird given that the roots of the celebration are distinctly Christian. While these days your average Halloween celebrant probably isn't thinking about prayers, you can be sure there's a group of people thrilled with the immense popularity of Halloween. A group of people who see one thing in particular that's truly special about this annual, fun-for-all-ages party: money. I'm very definitely really here at Egg Harbor Township in New Jersey, the United States, where Spencer Gifts, the company that owns Spirit Halloween, is located. Halloween is a massive cash cow, and total spending on Halloween in the USA is estimated to be about $12.2 billion in 2023. According to data from the National Retail Federation, in 2023, 73% of consumers plan to participate in Halloween, and they are projected to spend a record $108.24 each, with the greatest cost being costumes. Expenditures on costumes are estimated to reach a record $4.1 billion. Decorations, $3.9 billion. Candy, $3.6 billion. Halloween greeting cards, $500 million. Some people will also spend on attractions like haunted houses and other experiences. Spirit Halloween, probably the most well-known retailer of Halloween goods, has built a truly incredible business model in this space. They show up in an otherwise abandoned shop at a local mall, slap up some store banners and decorations, pack their space with costumes and spooky goods for sale, run the place like a regular shop in the couple months leading up to Halloween, and then disappear into the wind in early November, ghosting us all until next year. With this incredible model, they will take away an estimated 10% of that massive $12.2 billion pie with a 2-month-ish retail operation. Hot damn. So, given that all of these insane traditions and money-making strategies actually have a historical basis in pretty wholesome, fun, mischievous, and maybe perhaps even mentally healthy ways of examining challenging, uncomfortable topics like death and the afterlife, how have we ended up with Halloween being a yearly display of outlandish costumes and outrageous parties? This may come as a shock, but it's fun.